Right. Hello, everyone. That was nice. We are finishing our we're finishing our Let's Chat series, which has not been that long a series in the end, which is quite nice. We come out of Exodus that took us a while, and feels like we did Genesis for a while. Well, and there were things in between, but there we go. And I trust it's been a blessing to you. If you've missed out on some, please go back and we've got links to old sermons and catch yourself up on what we've shared about. This evening, we're talking about something that, again, we don't talk about very much. And some of the topics we talked about are really difficult and heavy and weighty topics. Some of them are just really awkward to talk about. Thanks for giving me church leadership again, Christine. What a blessing that was. This one is one that when we sit down one-to-one, we're really happy to talk about. But when it comes to like church family and we're all together, I feel like there must be, because when we share one-to-one, we all say it, and then we come in church family, all pretend that we're all, I don't know, perfect in every way. And that is, I want to talk about the Bible, which is obviously something that we talk about in every sermon, and we use it for prayers, and it's there in our worship, and yet at the same time, we don't actually often we don't like talking about this book. And as I was preparing this book, and I was sitting and chatting with different, church-going, solid, established, been walking in the faith for a very long time, much longer than me, people about the Bible, you start to discover that there is a common theme that goes through this book, and that is that this book is actually quite difficult to read. Now, we've all had these moments, right, where you're reading it, and it's like it's like Jesus is there in the room with you, right? And it's like, oh my goodness, and you're pouring your heart out, and like this story of Jesus is there, and it's like, oh, this is so exactly right. Or you're like, I just need to read a psalm today, and you belt open the psalm, and it's like the perfect psalm, and you're walking, it's like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed to hear today, and off you go, and it's like, wow, my day is set up. Equally, there are times when we sit and open the Bible and you read the section and you're like, what? Like, what was the point of that? And you're like, I got up, I got up early, I sat down, I said the prayer beforehand, right? And then I put on the special Christian worship song, and it's like, oh, yes, I'm in the zone. And it doesn't make sense. And so you put the Bible down, and you're like, okay, well, I got to go to work, or I got to go to whatever it is, and so off you go, and you get home, and the next morning you're like, okay, that's okay. I'm going to sit down with my Bible. This is what I do. And you crack open the Bible and you read the next section, and you're like, what was that? It was worse than the section before. And so you're sitting there and you're like, okay, all right. And the next day comes around, and maybe there's a bit that you got in this passage, but you're still not really getting it. And so day 4 comes around, and what happens? Oh, I will read it. I'm late at the moment, but I'll read it. I'll have to read it tonight. Oh, I'll catch up tomorrow. I'll read 2 sections tomorrow. Right? I hope this is not an embarrassing moment where I'm standing up and being like, this is my life. Hello, this is my life. I hope that that's someone else's life. Otherwise, we're going to have an awkward half an hour where I talk about this being evidently just my problem. But I would trust that in my conversations with many people, that this is something that seems to happen to Christians in this church, in other churches all around the world. This book can be really, really difficult to read. It can be disheartening. And we don't talk about it. We all just, oh yeah, what did you read? Oh, I read this. Oh, it was great. Oh my gosh. What are you reading? Oh, I'm reading Paul again. Because what seems to happen is one of 2 things. One, we only ever read the books that we know are safe. Hello, Mark. Good to see you again. John, you can step aside because Mark is where it's at. And if it's not that, then hey, somewhere into Paul's letters, one of the 4 or 5 short ones sounds good to me. Oh, no, I need something different. 1 John's there. How good. Let's talk about love. Man, I feel good about my day. And then you're like, oh, flick the page and it's like 2 John. And I remember when Christine was like, hey, can you preach off 2 John? I was like, sure, of course I can. And then you read 2 John and you're like, man, this is weird. But that's what this book seems to do at times. First problem is we only read the stuff that's safe. The second problem is the other one where we go, I'm just not going to read it today. And then, once in a blue moon, someone preaches something about the Bible, and you're like, yeah, I should read the Bible. That's what I should. Oh, my goodness. I haven't done that in a while. And you sit down the next morning, you're like, hey, let's have a crack at this. Here's one of the easy books. Hello, Mark. And then off you go. And you start reading that, and then you're like, okay, this is great. And then you finish Mark, and maybe you finish Mark, and maybe you don't. That has certainly been my wrestle with the Bible at various points in my life. It's not a problem that has been solved once, it's a problem that I have to keep solving. But what we don't talk about is the fact that we are reading an ancient text that was written to an ancient people, and it's talking about ancient stuff, and it's got ancient customs and practices, and then outside of that, they're referencing stuff that's even more ancient than that. And here am I in 21st century Australia trying to work out what it means. And that should be quite difficult. So let's talk about it a bit. I vividly remember many things in my high school, most of them bad. One of the things that was bad, I have a very carefully cultivated cool kid image here, and I'm sorry for those who've held me up in high esteem, being like, man, this guy, he's so funny and interesting. He must have been so cool in high school. And we're about to shatter that, because I wasn't. Let's just start. One of the most shameful things in my life, I went to school early because I wanted to go to the library. That's who I was, okay? So if you're one of those people, please don't tell me that. I'm trying to leave it behind. Anyway, I vividly remember, we had this class at the start of school, right? It was called PC. I don't know what we did. It was pastoral care, but really, I think it was just making sure we were all there. We sat down, they marked the roll, and then for 15 minutes, we just sat there. And then what would inevitably happen at 9:10 is my mate would turn around to me and go, hey, by the way, how did you work out question 8 for that maths homework last night? And then fear and doubt would grip my heart, right? Of the moment of, oh no, I definitely haven't done that. And it starts in 5 minutes. All right, maybe the teacher will no, he's not going to forget about it. I better come up with a good excuse. Now, thankfully, the night before, I remember this time, I was praying for people. And that's what I was doing. I got home and I was on my knees from 4 until I went to bed. But unfortunately, that doesn't really, but I promise that's what I was doing. That would be one option. The other option would be I'd just start writing as fast as I could. And they'd be like, no, I started it. And then it got really hard. And then he's like, yeah, but you're the nerd that can do this stuff. And you're like, yeah, anyway. That was my life, right? This would happen more often than you would think. Anyway, the point being, I was like so scared of what the teacher was going to say in 10 minutes when they went around and be like, who did your homework? And that fear would hold a real place in my heart for those 8 minutes. What I realized is I started treating God in the same way. And lots of preachers say this, but you should listen to me into the end because I'm interesting. But if you don't, shame on you. But if you don't, here, God is not about fear and shame. This is not school. This is an invitation again from a loving God who wants to sit with you and wants to share with you, and he wants to do it around his word. And so, if this is all you hear, please stop with the shame. Stop with the, oh, but it's been so long. It's time to get back on the wagon and have another go. Great. Here are some things that I have found helpful in the way that I approach the Bible and read the Bible. Because I have found this book at times to be that frustrating, I don't know what you're talking about book. And equally, I found this to be the source of absolute wisdom and joy and life. And those two things are a tension. What I'm finding is, though, as I work harder and harder and prioritize this book, I lean slightly further this way, and I find wisdom and life. I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm on the journey, and I'd like to invite you to be a part of that journey. One of the things that has been most helpful for me in discovering how to wrestle with this book is to read it in community. If you asked me a couple of years back, what's the best way to read the Bible? If you want to get the most out of the Bible, what's the best way to do it? I'd have given you this exact scenario. You're going to sit down somewhere, probably quiet, probably in the morning, maybe before breakfast, but probably with something hot in your hands to keep you, especially in the winter months, to be like, oh yeah, this isn't that bad. And then in that space, you might say a prayer, and then you'll pull out your Bible, and you'll sit, and you'll read a bit, and then you'll have a pray, and then you'll get up and on with your day. And I think I wouldn't be alone in suggesting that is a fairly good way of reading the Bible. What has been reminded to me is that for 1,500 years, that wasn't the way people read the Bible. That just wasn't how it was done. If you wanted to have the Bible, you either had to be incredibly rich or you had to go to synagogue. And it's not to say that the way that we do it now and that quiet time that we would call it is a bad way. Absolutely not. That is a great way to engage in the scriptures. But at the point that it becomes the only way that we engage with the scriptures, I think we've missed something. Because what would happen is the synagogue person would stand in front of the community and they would read out, or the church, I suppose synagogue is, anyway, you're with me. The church leader, pastor, elder, whatever, would stand up and they would read the scriptures. And then they would exegete it or explain it to everyone. The thing with being, though, as it was read out, you have license to sit there and say, I don't understand what you're going on. What does that mean? And you've got someone sitting next to you that you can chat and be like, I don't get that at all. What was that? And then when you go home, you've got someone across the dinner table and you can be like, I still didn't get that. What do you think about that? Because you were in the same room hearing the same thing. Beyond that, you've got the church. I mean, pastor is quite a modern term, I think. What's the old term? Alan will know. What were old people called? Ministers? Vicars? That's Anglican. Anyway, whatever they were a person. And you could go to them, and you could sit down with them. The key being, though, that this was read out in community, and so the community, the Spirit-filled community, begins to interpret the Bible together. Which is something that if we don't enter into this space well, is something we really miss out on. Someone said this, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. They said, the Spirit-filled community therefore interprets and applies the Bible with each other in their community. And if we only, or even primarily read our Bibles alone, we miss out on the invitation inherent within the structure of the text to ask questions, to debate, to discuss the parts of the Bible that puzzle us. The Bible was always meant to be interpreted within a Spirit-filled community. That's how the authors wrote it. And I forgot about that for a very long time. And so, my encouragement in this space is to listen. Sit down with people and read the Bible together. Write down your questions. Bring them to church dinners. Do we need to call them church afternoon teas? That's been a second thought in my head. Anyway, it's too early. Anyway, that's a question for... But do this in your home group. Do this in your family. What I've found really helpful for me is finding a couple of committed friends. And we just went, hey, for a season, this is what we're going to do. We don't know how long, but we're going to sit down and we're just going to read books together. Not chapters, we're going to read the book. And just let the book do its work. And that was so enriching for me. And I believe it can be enriching for you as well. Because quiet time for me, growing up, was always about read the next section. Right, you'd sit down and you'd pull out, here's Mark. All right, I'm going to read this story. Oh, Jesus walks on the water. How nice. 8 verses. I can handle that. And I'd read those 8 verses, get up, and off I would go with the next thing. And then the next day I'd come around and the next 8 verses, and here's Jesus doing something else. He's healing. No, I'm not going to guess. But I think he heals in Mark. And then he gets up and off he goes and does it. And so off I go and do the next thing. And each day I read just a section by section by section. What happened in my life, though, is I started seeing the Gospels. He's now checking me. Anyway, if I'm right, no, don't say anything because that'll go to my head. No, stop it. Right. What happened in my life, though, is the Bible became a section-by-section thing. And so there were no grand themes running through it. It was just, here's what Jesus did today. And so I'd think about that, and then off I'd go. What I'm discovering now is there is so much more to the Bible than what's happening in just those 8 verses. That the authors of the Bible are trying to make a point across multiple chapters across the books. And my invitation to you this week in the home groups is to sit and read the entire book of Ephesians. And it sounds like, oh my gosh. But it's 6 chapters. It'll take you about 25 minutes. And if you do that and start underlining and start going, hey, is there a pattern here? Is there something going on here? Is there key words that I'm seeing repeated through the chapters? All of a sudden you start keying into what Paul was trying to do. Because yes, he's trying to give you the section, but also there's a grand argument, a debate that he's trying to show you. And you only get it if you read across the book. When I'm in the middle of prepping Exodus at the moment. We're going to preach through Exodus in the second half of the year. To do that, you sit down and you read the whole of Exodus. You just do it. And it sounds like, oh my gosh. And thankfully, I'm paid to have the time, if that makes sense. And so I'm really grateful for that. But at the same time, that has been a really beautiful, wonderful thing for me to do. Because after that, I then read the entire second half of it just again. Because I want to see what is the writer of Exodus, what are they trying to show me? Once then I've done that, as I go section by section, I've got this roadmap in my head. Oh, I know where this is going. I pull out my little timeline. Here's what's happening. I can write in this. Oh, underlining this. And as I do that, I start understanding that this weird story here, this is how it's trying to fit in. This is what they're trying to do. An example. Someone told me to look out for patterns in 7 in the laws of Exodus. We all hit that. If you've ever, maybe you've read Exodus with us. If you have, well done. You get to like 20 and it's still interesting. You get to 25 and then everything stops. And they're like, hey, guess what? 5 chapters of the law coming your way. And all of these like weird archaic laws are there. And you're like, man, this is now in the time of section by section, and I'm not having a great time this morning. Hello, Ellie. Anyway, as someone says, hey, pay attention to patterns of 7, I started going, okay, well, let's start having a look. And you start seeing there's 7 sections in 25 that go across 25 and 26. And you read them. There's 7 sort of paragraphs. In NIV, they've got subheadings. The last one, of course, being directions for the Sabbath. And you sit there and go, okay, well, can I think of somewhere else where there's 7 things and they end with the Sabbath? And, of course, you've got the author is trying to point you out. What is happening here is what should have been happening with creation. We're trying to pull it back into what God's ideal plan was. 7 days that end in the Sabbath. 6 brackets of laws and then a law regarding the Sabbath. And he does this twice in that. And it's fascinating. And you sit there and go, okay, right. What these laws are trying to do in some way is related to what happened in creation, in ordering, in making the world as it should be. What I've found is the hard soil of some of these passages that are a slog to get into It's not as if they become a joy to read. I'm not at that place yet. Bless you if you are. But they've become a little bit looser. They've become a little bit looser for me to engage in, to work out what's happening in this space. I want to say that you're not alone. If this is your journey, I want to encourage you, you're not alone in this. We've talked about the community of believers around us, but there are people looking to bless you. Christine shared last week on Revelation, and she ends it with, "Hey, if you're interested, I've got resources." And I think, well, I think she could cover it, but I'll chip in a bit as well. Like if you're like, "Oh, I'm not sure what to do with this passage. I'm not sure what to do with this book." Hey, let us resource you. Let us find some stuff. Books, podcasts, sermons on almost anything. If you haven't got it, we'll find it. Because these resources, in a very real and tangible way, turn deserts into oases. Oases? Oases. Thank you. That sounds terrible. Sorry, I didn't read that, but I wrote anyway. I guess I want to leave you with the encouragement that reading the Bible doesn't have to keep being disappointing. And I can't promise that, day after day you'll wake up and be like, "Oh my gosh, it was him in the room." I can't promise that. But the days that I walk away frustrated at the moment are less than those when I walk away feeling enlivened. And I think the key for me was making this book a priority. Before it was something to fit in. Before it was something to start my day or end my day. Or just I can fit it in here. As I started valuing the book, as I started going, actually, I'm going to search for answers when I'm unsure, that's when I found new life in this book. An athlete who's currently preparing for the Olympic Games in Brisbane doesn't do it by themselves. They don't just turn up to the track one day as if they fell out of bed and just like, "Oh, I'm just here," and start running around. They go and they get the equipment they need. They go and get the support structure they need. And then they start, in some cases, a highly regimented program because they want to get there. They've got a goal ahead of them. I have found that picture a very helpful picture for how I engage with the Bible. If I want to understand this, I need to arm myself, equip myself, and then find habits, practices that are going to be beneficial for me in the short term and in the long term. Some of the things I've found helpful, finding a reading guide. If you go into Kurong for $4, they'll sell you a study guide that you could use in a home group for any book of the Bible. And they're not all wonderful, and then some are, but even if they're not wonderful, to sit with those 13 or so questions in a passage and just allow those to inform how I'm thinking about it is so helpful. For the ones who are really keen, go and find a commentary. Sit and go, is there a book of the Bible I just want to learn more about? And go and put $40 on the table and go, actually, I'm going to go and buy a commentary and read them in tandem. And yes, it takes time, and yes, it takes effort, but at the end of the day, you walk out knowing the book. Make it a priority, not just with time, but with your resources. The last practice I just want to share really quickly, I am finding for me, and if this is freeing for you, wonderful, and if it's not, then just walk away from it. I'm finding for me to sit down day after day and read section after section really wasn't helping me. And so instead I committed to, I'm going to read much more, but I'm going to read less frequently, which is a bit weird. But it was an intentional thing to say, I'm going to sit down, and instead of trying to cram time in when I've got 3 kids now, and it was before it was 2 kids, and that was hard enough, and be like, I'm going to sit down and have a time that I know that this is going to work in, just didn't work for me. So I went, okay, I'm going to walk away from that pattern. I'm going to free myself from that under the commitment to read more, less. Does that make sense? I have found it so helpful. I've walked away from the guilt of going, because it was hammered into me all my youth, of you need to read the Bible every day or you're not a Christian. And it took me a little bit to break that off me. I have found it so fruitful to sit and go, this is my time and I will read. And sometimes that time happens on the Tuesday, and sometimes it happens on the Wednesday. But it's okay, because the Lord is ready to meet with me then and there. Of course, I'm looking for him in the other days. Of course, I'm praying and sharing, and I've got worship music on, I'm podcasting. I'm engaging with this stuff all the time. I have the opportunity to do this. But in terms of me and my quiet time and sitting and reading, it has freed me. And I would encourage you, if it would work for you, give it a go. But with all of this, treat yourself gently. We can be really harsh on ourselves as Christians. Trying to convince ourselves, I think, that actually in some way or another we can make it, that we can impress Jesus if I do this sort of stuff enough, if I give enough, if I read enough, if I pray enough. And that's just not how it works. He loves us because he loves us because he loves us, not because you read your Bible this morning. We are loved, we are wanted, we are searched for, and he loves to meet with us. Don't let that be a place of guilt or shame. As we close this series, we're going to spend a moment, as we've done throughout this series, just encouraging some response. And so we're just going to leave the room open and quiet, and Brett will put something on in the background just to hover there for a bit. And just let the Lord come and speak. He speaks today and he speaks to us now. And so just let him come. And it could be something that I've shared tonight. It could be something through this series. And we've talked about church leadership. I have them written down somewhere. Church leadership. We talked about homosexuality. We talked about women, about politics, about end times, about revelation. And at some point in that time, you may have come and put a fish up on the wall. You may have taken a fish home. You may have sat there and the Lord's spoken really clearly to you, and you were like, actually, I heard him and I know what I need to do. This time for you now is to let the Lord remind you of that again. And it could have been last week, it could have been the week before, it could have been the first week. What did we commit to the Lord? And as you do that, we're going to come and share communion. And as part of that, as you take the bread and the cup, come and take a fish, and instead of putting it up on the wall, take it home. And put it somewhere that you're going to see it. Somewhere prominent. That as you walk past it in the morning, in the evening, that you'll see it and call to mind again, this is what my commitment with the Lord was. You can write on that fish, you can leave it blank, whatever you need to do. Just as an act again of saying, God, I've heard you speak, and I'm going to do what you say. Let me pray for us. Father, you do speak We open our hearts now. Holy Spirit, would you come? Would you be with your people? Would you speak to us now? We wait for your voice alone.